delta between a good prompt and a poor prompt, particularly sort of for data work, is massive. Being able to sort of understand what do I feed in the context. For example, in the case of writing, let's say again, a SQL query or doing any sort of data work, intuitively giving it the schema of the database would be a good idea, and like the data types and so on. It's actually counterintuitive. So when you use LiveDocs, for example, or any sort of like, not just LiveDocs, any tool that's writing SQL on your behalf, chances are that the data types, the schema, everything is going to be inferred in runtime. So you actually just like packing the context window with the wrong thing, like, or something that already exists or will be injected automatically for you. It's actually like describing the relations, the references in the table that's actually more valuable.
Don't forget to subscribe to Data Neighbor wherever you listen to podcasts and YouTube. And drop a like and comment below. It keeps us bringing you great content like this. Hey everyone, before we get into the show, we want to announce something really exciting. We're kicking off 2 new completely free learning series, one on AI evaluation and one on agentic analytics. If you head over to dataneighbor.com, you can see the full live schedule as well as get any of the past recordings and free practical resources. We've got a ton of really interesting workshop topics planned, from analyzing product data in Claude Code, to designing your first AI evaluation plan, to creating custom annotations tools, to validating the business impact of AI features, to cracking the data science interview, leveraging AI tools. You'll find the full schedule and everything else at dataneighbor.com. And if you want to go even deeper, we're offering 2 cohort-based live hands-on courses. One's called AI Analytics for Builders, where you'll learn how to leverage AI to become your own product data scientist, become analytically independent, stop waiting on analysts and data scientists to answer your questions. And the other one is AI Evaluations for Product Development, where you can start to actually measure the tangible impact of your AI features on user outcomes to business outcomes. They're both super hands-on, practical, cohort-based courses. You're going to work with us as well as other AI practitioners in the field to learn week by week for 5 or 6 weeks. And at the end, you'll have a really strong understanding of either how to leverage AI to become an analyst or how to conduct the right analysis to evaluate AI features. So we hope you'll join us. Check it out at dataneighbor.com. Now back to the show. Welcome back to Data Neighbor with Hayes, Travi, and Sean, and to our special series, the Analyst's New Toolbox. So these are conversations we're having with founders and builders, reimagining how data gets analyzed and how decisions get made in the age of AI today. For decades, data teams have helped companies make decisions by answering questions, writing queries, building dashboards, modeling relationships, and what happens next. But now we're thinking about what happens when pieces of that workflow start to get automated as AI assists analysts and data scientists, or even starts doing that analysis itself. So we're joined by Arsalan Bashir, founder and CEO of LiveDocs today, a company that's building what you call your AI data scientist. Arsalan, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me on, guys.
Welcome, Arsalan.
Arsalan, you're the founder and CEO of LiveDocs. I think I saw you've been working on this product for nearly 6 years. I'm sure you've seen firsthand how AI is like starting to change real data workflows. Before we get into what you're building at LiveDocs, what did you kind of see that's broken or missing about how teams have used data historically? Like, was there a moment where you realized the traditional tools weren't truly cutting it?
Yeah. So we started working on LiveDocs purely by like kind of poking around the data space and finding this kind of unique problem space that we're building for right now. What we started off building was like a traditional BI tool. We've all been there. We've worked at companies kind of where, I mean, regardless of what company you worked on, data is usually the bottleneck at some point. It comes down to people taking screenshots of charts, copying across tables to spreadsheets. Formatting is broken only for all of that stuff to end up in a PowerPoint presentation anyways, back and forth. And then there's a lot of human, like in the loop, a lot of things break as a result of one number being off. So we're trying to build a BI tool, kind of with a better user experience. And it was basically your average, like no code BI tool targeting like non-technical people. The theory was that, okay, if we go to non-technical people at companies, they might be able to like self-serve analytics that way. And big breakthrough, honestly, the sort of the the aha moment for us as a team was when, when LLMs kind of happened and AI models kind of started becoming more ubiquitous, and particularly in their ability to write code, because that completely shifts kind of the game entirely, because now you don't have to do no code, which is essentially code, but you're doing it through a series of drop downs, to now
Right.
have agents who can actually write code, which is pretty much what a human data analyst or scientist would do, but that complexity of it is now sort of taken away. So non-technical folks could actually get a robust solution without having to like navigate this maze of drop downs and so on, and still be, the user experience would still be something that they would be able to kind of navigate. So that was really the moment when we realized that, okay, traditional BI is it's a trade-off between like how rigid sort of your workflow can be. There's no code as an escape hatch. It's usually some sort of a SQL and a charting layer on top of that. So you sacrifice that flexibility in order to get some like ease of use. And BI again wasn't like the best way to explore data. It's really when you have some insight and you want to keep like track of it, and you want like set and forget these dashboards. And we realized that's not the nature of like the kind of problem we wanted to solve. And really like change the game for us. And that's when we realized like, okay, we need to build a data workspace from scratch with, while being a bit opinionated about kind of what we're building, as opposed to trying to like build like this behemoth that is like plugs in, picks and shovels approach. And we wanted to build like an AI native kind of data workspace by just asking ourselves and our customers constantly, like, what does data work look like in the future? Build for that, as opposed to like trying to like, use some glue-like solution and hack together, like chat with your data and like text to SQL and stuff like that.
Yeah, when you saw that gap and kind of had that aha moment, was there something you started imagining that would actually replace how data teams work today? I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit already.
Yeah, I mean, the one question we continue to ask ourselves very often. I mean, it's a rare day when we don't ask ourselves that question, is, okay, this is what we're doing today. This is kind of where the buck is. How do we imagine data work being done 5 years from now? And let's build for that. The models are going to catch up. The technology is going to catch up. But like, I think the bridge here is the user experience. Like when we were doing the BI, we were exploring the BI space, there was not a data tool for non-technical people. And we understood like nuances of why there is no data tool for non-technical people, because at some point you're going to have to use the word join, and then there's gets in the room. And nobody
Which
really
seems like
knows.
a simple word. I feel like SQL is so to me, I'm like, man, this is English. But like it does, I guess, yeah, it's difficult if you don't know what it is exactly in the beginning. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I mean, but you're super. This points at something very interesting that is a sort of a micro pattern you see in and around data, that once you see it, it's hard to like unsee it. It's basically like folks who know what join is and to folks who don't know. That's the entire like situation. At any team that's doing, it's very rare to have a situation where the business context and the actual technical skill are the same person. You're in the setup where somebody has context on what the company's trying to do, and then there's somebody who knows how to write SQL and Python and all of that stuff. But to them, when you look at the data, it's just numbers. It could be any number. They don't actually know what. So what does this number imply? Is this good? Is this bad? So there has to be this. Its data is fundamentally something that has to be done collaboratively, or like the person who's doing it has to have context on like, what am I trying to do? At what point do I stop? What am I trying to optimize for? The problem with like that data tools in general face is that the context is fragmented. Somebody knows the actual business, whether it's a product manager, if it's sort of a knowledge domain where like this cross-functional work like biotech, fintech, where the subject matter expert and the actual data scientists are two separate people. The whole problem revolves around like getting these people on the same page. So the product manager asking for a particular ad hoc query wants to run a specific experiment or wants to sort of improve the product a certain way. Whereas the data scientist looks at it as a data request. I need to write so-and-so SQL, and does this do the job? And then there's a lot of like ping pong between these two. LLMs fundamentally solve that. Because I mean, it doesn't solve that, but actually at least streamlines the problem where like you need to give the same amount of context to the model that you would need to give to a human data scientist, assuming both of them can write like code, SQL, Python, whatever. So you have to be very specific in like kind of how you prompt it and what context you give it, and like how you like steer the output towards kind of what you actually want to measure. So this actually directly exposes the heart of the problem. And that's kind of what got me excited. Like, okay, the problem space is a lot more defined now, and the interactions are a lot more direct. It very closely mimics what a product manager or somebody who's trying to do any data analysis via a proxy of like having a external data scientist or analyst kind of does. And that's when, sort of we have this like light bulb moment, you're AI data scientist.
Hmm.
Oh, so that's
so interesting. Hey, quick question for you, Arslan. Did you have a data background of some sort, or was this a thing that you're like, I'm just passionate about this?
I do not have a data background. In fact, I think on our team now, a few people have a data background, but when we started off, the core team was like united around this one rallying cry. So I come from a mechanical engineering background, actually.
Oh.
Okay.
So I worked at some automobile companies. I worked at some like startups as like a founding engineer and so on. And what really got me into this was like at companies where essentially it was like three guys in a room and a spreadsheet, all the way to like automobile, like running a fabrication plant. Data was the consistent problem through and through. So it's like a problem that I kept seeing running over and over and over into. In fact, at some point in my life, I would almost live inside like tools like Tableau, tools like Power
Mhm.
BI. That's kind of what, got me into this problem. But the team is united around two things. The first thing is like we all love building high quality software. Like that's our thing. Like we do not tolerate like poor software, but we don't build it. We don't like to associate with it.
We don't like to associate with it.
Software and like I think good user experience software, and that's what was lacking in the data space. So that's kind of something else that drew us to the space. So like when you think about like a workplace collaboration, you have tools like Slack, Notion that have like that really like was a step improvement on like the user experience. So before Slack, you'd have like email clients and like like poor ways to work collaboratively. There were some attempts, but Slack really changed the game where it brought like this chat style. And Notion again, before that, you had like Confluence and like God knows what. And they really changed the game. And there was nothing like that for data kind of when we started. Like we want that modern user experience, but for data tools, because data tools are fundamental to like how every company operates. Every company should either be looking into data or like leveraging data to make better decisions, or they already are doing that or should be doing that. There's no other kind of way around it. And then the other thing that kind of got us excited about this space was like we love building amazing software. This seems like a place that could kind of use it. And then the fact that we were not like insiders in the data space when we started
Yeah.
off really gave us the freedom to like, like experiment with kind of what we're doing and like really reason from first principles on like, okay, what is the data scientist or like the data analyst or like just any person on LiveDocs, what are they trying to achieve and what's the best and shortest path to getting them there? What are reasonable assumptions to make about their workflow? What amount of control do we give them that's actually good and that's flexibility versus like, for example, like if you're connecting to 10 different data sources and I ask you to pick the query resolution engine every time, that's just annoying. If it's a CSV file, it's pretty clear that DuckDB is the best way to go, or if you're using Postgres, then there should probably be some native query resolution and so on. These are like reasonable assumptions to make. So the user experience cleaned up quite a lot. Why should I have to ask you to like simple things like establish semantic relationships between your data in your BI layer when the software can automatically infer or pick it up from your warehouse? So this outsider kind of perspective, like why is this happening? A lot of things were happening just because they've always happened that way. The outsiders gave us the ability to kind of like question these like and like build from first principles.
I think the perspectives is actually pretty helpful, especially, like if we think about mega companies. I mean, like obviously people who kind of live and breathe the pain would have, like kind of offer their very targeted vision or whatever that they work towards. But like, for example, like Airbnb wasn't founded by somebody in the hospitality space, like so on and so forth. Like, electric cars was not founded by a car guy, and things like that. And we're obviously going to get into that once we, down in this interview here. But it's actually pretty helpful to kind of perhaps, down the line that we, in this episode, we chat about how you're envisioning kind of like from your perspective, the pain, the future, and the gap from here until then.
When you're starting to like build towards this vision in the beginning, what that kind of first version of LiveDocs look like? Or what was kind of like the first thing you're trying to test out when you started building?
Well, the way we stumbled onto data was we actually started thinking, and back then it was just myself. I was thinking about like, how do companies actually operate? How do projects in general operate? And I thought a lot about like knowledge ontologies. My previous company was in the ed tech space where we looked deeply at curriculums and like how knowledge is organized and what's the best way to like transfer learning and so on. I I was looking at everything through that prism of like how companies organize knowledge fundamentally. And then this was like in the super early days where I was thinking about, okay, knowledge can roughly be sort of branched off into two groups. There's the more static knowledge that's like the, the things that don't change often, like what your product's doing, your onboarding manual. It's not like it's changed. It is dynamic to a degree, but it does not change like to the second. You don't need to monitor it. It's like going to be static until something happens. And then there's the more dynamic sort of knowledge layer, which is, your data-rich information, like data-rich documents, like your dashboards and so on, which tell you very important things about the team, the project, whatever. But those need to be sort of dynamic. So the first problem I tried to solve was trying to like organize all of this information in some sort of a non-linear notebook. So I was like, okay, the structure, the ontology of this knowledge is non-linear. It does not read top to bottom. Like you can go deeper into certain things and you can go, so it's almost like a stack of cards. So you can look at it, the top layer, there's just 2 cards. And then if you go deeper down the path, there's a lot more cards.
Okay.
Under that particular card. So that was the first kind of sort of our segue into this problem. From there, it was actually a very like serendipitous like tangent we took into like just focusing on data, which is when like folks were like, okay, at some point, all of these documents are substantiated or all this knowledge is substantiated by data. Very simple as like, it was like, imagine like a note-taking app. And there's probably a video of this on YouTube somewhere of me doing a demo. So you're reading an information-rich like research paper. And then at some point you come across a very technical term, you click on it, it opens a stack of cards where you can dive deeper into that specific thing. So if depending on your expertise level or your know-how, you could just read the top level, or you could click down and go all the way down to like reading deeper about this one particular thing. At some point, one of our early like users, apostles, so to speak, gave us this idea of like, it would be cool if we could, actually reference live numbers here. If I could say, today we had X page views and the value of X is filled out from like Google Analytics or something. So we went down that direction. And that's eventually we got into this point where we were ingesting data from so many data providers like Source Systems, Google Analytics, Stripe, Google Ads, the usual suspects. We built data sync engines. Then we came into this problem where like raw data wasn't good enough. We added a transformer layer where people could write SQL. And then we go back to the drawing board because this product was so good. Like for non-technical people, it was like, a data tool that's as simple to use as your favorite note-taking app. And now you're asking them to write SQL queries. So it was a bit of like a learning experience.
Okay.
Yeah, these guys are not going to write SQL queries. We have to go back and actually build the metrics layer for them. To do that, we have to build some sort of a semantic layer. So it's like understandable to them, like what they're doing. And then we were saying, okay, they can write SQL queries, but not everything can kind of be done with SQL. We need to give them a Python sort of execution environment as well. And at that point, just LLMs just happened and everything just came together. We're like, okay, we need to do a data workspace, which is... Yeah.
That's a really cool story.
Were you kind of stuck where it's like, oh man, there's so many dimensions on this. How do I round them out? And then all of a sudden, ChatGPT, and you're like, job's done.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just that. There are so many. It's interesting. I hope we get a chance to talk about. There's a lot of like incumbents and like tools that are big in the data space today that I just don't see them existing even like 2 years later. Just because LLMs are so good at doing stuff like that. Like the interesting one was like, when we were building this data sync engine to like sync data from Google Analytics, sync data from Stripe, it got me thinking about like the Airbytes and the Fivetrans and so on of the world. They're solving like incredibly hard problem for humans to do today, just because the nature of the problem, like you have to write all this ingestion sort of scripts, but then the endpoints are changing so rapidly. There is so much nuance in all of this. Every day, LinkedIn deprecates some endpoint and some off on Twitter. But they have like entire like feature teams, I presume, dedicated to this. And it's a very difficult job to do. But like if you asked an LLM, even like not the best model, like, hey, can you pull this data from this endpoint? It's just going to spit out the answer. And you have this like one-off ready to go ingestion thing that's pretty robust and can be used like in prod. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's not that deep, and things like that, like things that we were doing. And even like writing the metrics layer down, as Hey mentioned, finding out like the dimensions and like what metrics are actually interesting. There's a market research aspect to it, like what is actually interesting to see, what's actually interesting, like metrics or like data points that we should show our customers. But then there's also like, how is this data structured? Can we normalize it anyway? Is there any standard schema we can conform to? All of those things don't really matter. Today you show an LLM with reasonable column and table names. I would go on a limb and say like, even without like metadata, it can probably infer data types and write what you want. So that is amazing. It's like we have been blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're building a company where it's like, boom, here's like a huge unlock. So maybe more, maybe more along, continuing down that thread, like, and you mentioned it earlier, like when you say you're AI data scientist, what does that mean in practice and in the product itself?
Yeah. Again, like as I said, we were talking a little bit about kind of what things that we can do today with AI that you could do previously, of course, but would be time consuming and would be like in Q4 we are going to do so and so, and now it's just like just give it to ChatGPT and it'll do it like right now. One sort of implicit thing that's happened as a result is that data products were often stuck in these sort of like ground level problems. Like all the BI tools were like, oh, what's the best way to allow people to go from ingesting to like charting? Now that AI exists, like you can actually, well, that's almost a solved problem. It's an implementation detail. It's trivial. What's non-trivial now is for these companies, for data companies, to think beyond kind of how do you go from like Google Analytics to seeing a chart or something like that. That's where like we think that this like vision of having like an AI data scientist is actually super relevant. What AI data scientist means today is that every company has or every team has, experimentation sort of motion where they're actually constantly experimenting with data. They have something that's more proactive. For example, someone's always constantly looking for opportunities kind of within your data and looking for like errant patterns, looking for, answering ad hoc queries that your product team makes. And there's a lot of data work generally happening. And then there's another layer of like internal data tooling. And depending on what you're doing, any sort of data work, like you're white labeling a product for internal users, having dashboards, there's a lot of like wrangling of numbers that's happening either to support decision making or to like find opportunities, increase revenue, move the needle on growth and all of that. And this work is often comes with a lot of friction. When we say AI data scientists, we mean that it's a two-step kind of motion. Today, what AI data scientist means that if you are running any sort of serious data work in your company, LiveDocs will help you get from 0 to 80% of the job done in a matter of seconds.
Wow.
Your data folks can focus on only the business logic aspect of it. So what that looks like tangibly today is that, let's say you're running a SaaS business and you want to measure why your customers are churning or something. Now, that's a very loaded question. There's so many things that require context. But then in order to answer that, there's a lot of like yak shaving. There was this like very famous computer science course called Learn Python the Hard Way. And it would kind of having yak shaving, like the boring stuff you need to do to actually get to the
yak shaving. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
All right.
The boring work you need to do in order to get to the actual work. So
I hate yak shaving. Oh man. It's another day shaving the yak. God.
It's like, like setting up the environments locally, managing dependencies.
Totally.
Getting the connection to the data, pinging John, who has the credentials, and then setting up something locally, and then making like cleaning up the data. Oh, is there rows missing here? Okay, now this date field is not converted into the right format, and so on. You have to do all of that in order to get to the point where you're able to actually start thinking about the problem. Like, oh, why are the customers churning? Like, that's what I need to do. That's where LiveDocs kind of adds the most impact today. It gets you right to the point where you're describing exactly kind of what the business problem that you is. It's almost like having an assistant that lives kind of in this data workspace, and you tell it like, okay, we're trying to look at churn today. Do the needful, I guess. And it already comes up with like insights and so on. And it assists you in all sorts of ways. It's really meant to be a power tool. To be clear, it's not one of those, we're not trying to build a tool where like it's like you zero shot questions, although you could, that's given the advancements in like how the models work. We're really meant to like help steer you in the direction of doing like more serious data work, like anything from like writing specific Python, like I want to do this with polars as opposed to pandas and like things like that. It's a data domain expert that lives in this sort of workspace that we built. That's part one of the vision, to like accelerate the rate at which data work is done and streamline how data work is done in general across Python, SQL, whether it's like writing bash commands, plotting charts, browsing the internet to find a data set. All of those things are like, it takes care of it while you focus on sort of your the actual business problem that you're trying to solve. This is relevant for in two ways. The first one is if you're a data scientist and you want to get a lot more work done,
right,
than you otherwise would, or even to teams where like there is no data scientist. There's someone who's data literate generally, who knows kind of what they want, but is not necessarily a data tool expert. They probably don't even write SQL. They can actually get a lot more value out of this product where they're almost like pair programming with it in a way that, okay, this a scientist, I have the business context. I know, okay, this CSV file contains the data from Facebook ads, and this one contains this other table in my database contains, information from our users. Stitch the two together, plot a chart. That kind of work is like happening in an instant now, as opposed to something where they would have to the painful job of exporting everything inevitably ends up in like Excel or Google Sheets, and someone writing some crazy like multi-line formula.
Right.
That's kind of step one of our vision of like AI data scientists. The step two is like basically what it's a very exciting time to be building it right now, is like where we imagine like this two-way collaboration. Like right now, data tools are stuck in this phase where like the collaboration is one way. I think ChatGPT really spoiled it for us, because the UI, like you write a chat in, like write a message here, it's just going to chat with you and do whatever. I think that data tools, the interactions are going to be way different from just like sort of chatting with an agent. We imagine this two-way collaboration between the human and the AI agents when it comes to data. And we also imagine a lot more autonomy being given to the AI agents as the models get better at writing code and actually gaining context on business problems. That's step two. Step two for us, which is something we're building right now, is like giving LiveDocs more autonomy on kind of your data. That means like without you prompting, it would suggest like experiments like, hey, you measured churn the other day. Maybe you should look at retention. I've actually run some analysis numbers for you. Here's a doc. Take a look at it. If it looks good, keep it. If not, discard. Or that's the more like autonomous like AI research, sort of like this AI doing research on your behalf. And it's not just limited to like BI problems, like plotting charts or like more like business facing things, but we want to get it to a point where it's actually doing actual sort of research kind of for you, where it's able to like pull ML models from like Hugging Face, productionize code, and ship it back to your GitHub, send pull requests to your DBT repo, and so on. All of that stuff that currently is a very blocking sort of synchronous process. If it's a true AI data scientist, as it says it is, it should be doing that autonomously. And that's kind of the feature that we are most excited about. And then also more like proactive steering of
proactively. Yeah,
doing stuff more proactively. Of course, always with human in the loop until the models, kind of get good enough for us to trust them to do whatever. With human in the loop, but proactive is the name of the game when it comes to data. Like imagine you had a data scientist who just did nothing until you told them, hey, give me this.
Yeah.
At that point, you don't want to be the person driving that entire operation.
Yeah, I've worked with people like that before.
The AI is coming for them.
The AI is coming for them. Be proactive, everyone, because the AI is going to be proactive soon.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean by what we mean by like when we say AI data scientist. It means today it will be sort of like having an actual data scientist with you every step of the way, kind of answering any questions you might have, writing code for you, writing queries, checking things, explaining things, pulling data from the internet, doing some background research for you, writing terminal commands, debugging, all of these things that a human data scientist would do today. And the future is going to be like very autonomous. Like I imagine that it would be a two-way collaboration between the human and the business context owner, and it would actually drive outcomes proactively as opposed to like having to be prompted. And of course, the prompts would get a lot more like abstract in the sense that you wouldn't have to say like use polars to do so and so. It's already like assumes the best practices based on like the context around the problem you're trying to solve. Yeah,
that's so cool. Me and Harry just kind of talking about that the other day about like what do you think the future of data AI tooling is, and proactivity was a big part of it. I loved your example, Baron, like, hey, you looked at churn yesterday, let's look at retention today. That's like a very clear follow-up that you would just have someone do who is a human.
Yeah. And then that takes into account also other tools. Like you have these observability tools where functionally the most important thing is to understand data lineage and understand why data quality drops at a certain point. Now, that is something you could use a different tool to do, but if you have somebody who say the best way to find out is if your data team came and told you like, hey, there's something wrong with this chart and I can trace it back to this source system because I've been looking at the data. That's literally my job. I happened, here's what happened. Like that's something that happens more proactively, things like that. There's a whole class of tools that was previously like not built around this idea that data work could be proactive. It's just something that you do. I feel like, is not too long for this world with like clever use of AI and like when we move beyond this paradigm of like chat with your data, that's a good start. Don't get me wrong, but there's a whole world to be explored with like what AI can do for data in particular.
I mean, everything that you described is still today's pain points for sure,
Yeah.
across the board. So I'm excited to kind of see what it looks like. Should we go ahead and see a demo?
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen.
All right. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, we're about to do a really cool demo. So please move on over to YouTube. You're not going to want to miss this.
So this is LiveDocs. The core primitive in LiveDocs is docs, essentially, which you can think of as a notebook. It's very similar to a Jupyter notebook for folks who work with one, but it has a lot more bells and whistles. So unlike a Jupyter notebook where you're essentially able to write just Python, in LiveDocs, you can write SQL queries, you can plot charts, tables, you can add inputs, you can prompt other LLMs. So if you want to build like multi-step, agents, you can build them natively kind of in LiveDocs.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so it's really the all-in-one kind of workspace. So you have all of these things like queries, Python. You have access to sort of your terminal environment if you want to do some environment setup before that. And essentially, this is what the platform looks like. It's super open, and you can bring in sort of any of the tooling that you're used to. You can connect LiveDocs to any of your data store systems. Right here, I've connected a few like random like ClickHouse, Snowflakes, and Postgres database, uploaded a bunch of files. And then the cool part of it is all of this tooling can actually be used by LiveDocs AI, which today sort of looks like this, where you essentially tag. So here, right here for this demo, a CSV file that I've exported kind of from our CRM, from some CRM, and ask it business facing questions like, okay, what is the top performing branch? That should be enough. It's a very simple question. You can select whatever model you like. So it's very sort of cursor style and enable or disable extended thinking, although this is a very simple question. When you hit enter, what LiveDocs does, the first thing it does is it makes a git commit. In this case, it's empty, so there won't be a commit. And then it's exploring, it starts exploring the data the way a human data scientist would do. It would start first log a couple of rows from the data. It would print out sort of try to understand what the structure looks like. And of course, at any point, you can kind of see what it's doing in the end. So this is a fairly simple kind of prompt. So it's able to like literally write a couple of SQL queries and just plot the chart and tell you like, yeah, this is the branch that is performing the best. Here's some follow-up suggestions, and then it commits the results, which is all of this. What you see, it's essentially a Python file. There's no like proprietary format or anything like that. It just exports to a regular Python file or an IPy notebook format. You can work with both of those formats, and then you can ask it follow-up questions or any other sort of prompts you like. Now, this is a very simple kind of a prompt for something that you see happening in your average team, like multiple times a day, where there's like one-off questions and so on.
Right.
But we have, more extended sort of analyses available on our landing page for like examples of stuff you can do, which is everything from like forecasting all the way to like sentiment analysis and more complex sort of things. And then once you're done, you literally could, share this analysis with a single click. You can ask LiveDocs to like, okay, give it a title and give it a description.
Oh, nice.
Share, and you would either copy the link to this document, which would include the queries and the charts and everything, or you could go into sort of this app mode where you only want to show them sort of the chart and you don't want to show your business users kind of the SQL queries. One way we've seen this being used is actually with inputs. So if I add a slider input and then I add a SQL query, and I'm going to select this exact. So if I were to write a query like select star from sales.csv just to see what this data looks like. And here, let's say I wanted to filter this data by like quantity, I would call it quantity, and then I would give it a value of 1 to 10 looks about right. I could do something like where quantity equals, I would do this, and then input 2, and then I could just run these cells. And so now as I
That's pretty slick.
change this, and then I could also chart the results. So the entire notebook environment is reactive. It knows what cells to run. Right here, because I changed the query a little bit, it tells me that these cells are stale. I can now select this data frame that it yielded and kind of go and plot a chart from it. And now if I want to share this with my stakeholders, they don't necessarily want to see this query aspect of things. All they want is this slider, and they want a chart. So now whenever they slide it.
Interesting.
Once it's published, it's going to update the results for them. So you can ship these like internal tools almost that, actually people can use and embed into other platforms, other websites, and so on. Yeah, so LiveDocs is super feature rich as a product, and you could have notebooks scheduled to be run every time. For example, this analysis we just ran, I wanted to run every morning at 9 a.m. And I would save, and I could then set it up to notify me by email. I could say send it to a@livedocs.com, give it a custom subject line. Hey, sales report is here, and then I would do something like, oops. Hey, Arsalan, here's the chart of our sales. And I could tag that particular cell in it. And in the actual email, it would sort of
Hey,
That's
swap
cool.
this out I would swap it out for a screenshot of this chart. And we'll just send, you can notify folks by like email, Slack, or you could,
Slack. Oh,
yeah,
that's cool. Okay.
Slack too, it would insert like a screenshot of the actual cells that you wanted to do, and also notify by webhook. Yeah, so that way you can actually trigger schedules via webhooks as well. So that way you could have like one notebook where it's running some logic with Python to like ingest data from any source system, for example, and then you can also write that data using this db save cell back to your database, and then that would trigger another notebook would just do the charting part. That way you can have like a separation of concerns. LiveDocs understands the ontology of kind of what needs to run when, so it always makes sure the ingestion notebook runs, then that triggers the notebook that actually runs the visualization. So you can actually build like complex, like DAG like workflows with just notebooks, and you'd be able to go back to this kind of For You tab and just monitor them from here. Okay, it ran successfully, and you have everything you need in one sort of glance. Yeah, so this is kind of where LiveDocs is today. I could go on and on about kind of all of the different features, because I said it's a very feature-rich platform. There's a
Yeah.
lot micro problems we've solved, but at a high level, this is kind of what LiveDocs does.
That's so cool. How do you in the sort of like the agent mode, when you ask natural language prompts to get data and answers, or I guess two questions. One is what happens, or how do you check for correctness, accuracy? The second one is, if it made a mistake, what do you do?
So well, the second question is actually easier to answer than the first one. In the second question, actually, how do you sort of, if it makes mistakes, what do you do? There's two types of kind of mistakes it can make. The first one is like errors. The query doesn't run. For source systems, actually, that query systems that support dry runs, for example, BigQuery allows you to dry run a query. It's very easy to catch that before the user even sees it. Even if the user sees an error from the actual query, it's going to like try to re-enrich the context and try to sort of write the query again. And so if it makes an error in the query, it's easy to pick up and fix. The difficult one actually is sort of where it measured the wrong thing. It wrote a query that actually tracks the wrong thing. For that, we always make sure that the agent is constantly giving you sort of like commentary on what it's doing. And you can read the chain of thought. The only way to really sort of account for those errors is to have human in the loop. There's a human who has context. One thing we allow users to do in order to sort of prevent errors like that is to give it massive amounts of context beforehand, before actually running the queries. That goes beyond like giving it the schema of the table, the data types, and so on, which is stuff it can actually infer in sort of runtime. You can actually upload like product documentation to the data tab. You can upload like internal like data glossaries and all that stuff. You can give it web links, like here's the link to our documentation. So complete sort of context and as much context as possible in order to like write accurate queries. Even then, I would say, and this is a problem that LLMs face very often, is that if you give it like a very broad query, like measure my, profit, then it's as a complex query. It needs to take your revenue into account, any source of like any like accounts payable, sort of like anything that's deducting from that. And there's so many ways, even in super large companies, you'd be surprised like how, I mean, I'm sure we've all seen there's like 10 ways to measure.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone's doing their own thing. Those kind of situations, in order to avoid them, at some point a data glossary comes in. And it's similar techniques, as I said at the beginning, like, the problem is very similar to actually how you get a human data scientist to like avoid, or data analyst to avoid measuring the wrong thing. If the SQL query doesn't run, they wrote the wrong query, that's the best possible outcome actually, because now there's a very clear like trace. But if they're measuring the wrong thing, ultimately comes down to like how much context you give it. And and do that. And in order to like, how do you check for the correctness is again to like explain the query back to the user, explain what it did. In fact, now we're kind of having this sprint where after like around this week, you'll be able to like explain results of queries by looking at the actual query, and something will come in and say like, okay, this is what this query actually does. It joins this table with this table, and as a result, it measures this set of rows, and this is what you're looking at exactly. So making sure that even if the user is non-technical, they actually understand kind of what is being done here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Too, it's kind of like, I think with these kind of products, like for a data scientist, for me, it's like that SQL query was right there in the notebook before the graph popped out. So like that's somewhere I can look at it. And in terms of a kind of, non-technical stakeholder who might not know that background, I could imagine being like, hey, run this. Like hopefully there's still a data scientist in your organization somewhere that you are paying a salary, ideally, fingers crossed for me. But you can have stuff. I mean, it's my stakeholders today, right? Like they don't know what's in the SQL query behind the numbers I give them. But I really like the idea that you have there of like it'll explain itself, like what actually got joined together, so you can at least piece together the business logic.
Ideally, we want to like one of the things we're looking to sort of thinking deeply about, and as I said, we're running that first principles kind of thinking behind it, is how do you do good handoff? So this is a very important interaction in the data world where non-technical user or like business problem owner asks data person a very broad question. That person translates it into some sort of query / analysis, does some work, and then comes back to them. It's like two worlds colliding. One person only cares about like driving outcomes. The other person's like, hey, have I done the right thing here? Like, is this what you want? And the other person's like, I don't know, because I don't know what I'm looking at. So it's like the data scientist trying to explain the query and the business problem owner trying to explain kind of what the question was in the first place. That handoff experience can be improved quite a lot. One way that LiveDocs does it today, which actually can be improved quite a lot, is like commit all of this work to GitHub. Then you have a very clear like pull requests and so on. But that's not good for non-technical people. The handoff, realistically, I mean, in the future is going to be like the AI does some amount of work and then comes back to the human data scientist to have something like a pull request, but not necessarily asking you whether I wrote the right code or like this is the diff between the two queries. Not just that, but also telling him like very specifically what was done here. I've read from these sources and I've plotted a chart here because in my understanding, for example, revenue comes from this source system, which is Stripe, and then all the expenses are going out from this sort of Mercury or whatever. So that's why I did what I did. And the human sort of data scientist approves that. So that human in the loop needs to be very explicit, especially when it comes to data problems, and then hand off to the non-technical sort of business problem owner. This handoff process like really needs to be like super slick. It's almost like a pull request being merged, but for kind of the data world. It's not just code. It's actually aligning all these stakeholders on like what was done, whether that meets the original prompt, and so on. And also, at the same time, creates this sort of like this tribal knowledge of what was done so that the next time around, it doesn't need to ask you again, what is revenue? What do you mean by revenue? Or what do you mean by churn?
Yeah.
That's kind of something the way I imagine it being done, at this whole AI do data work matures as a thing in teams.
I think one sort of, I guess, underrated underlining here is that we talk about the technical data scientist and then the non-technical stakeholders. You can even imagine, for example, like I lead the data team at Sean and I both work at the same company. As one gets more and more senior and less hands-on as a data professional, at some point you're gonna hope to be able to actually do whatever the stakeholders today are doing, but then you don't actually need to go through the motions of trying to figure out which table is the right thing, which logic is the right thing, and most of the time I'm trying to connect the dots across many disciplines. And so that gets exponentially harder because we have data scientists who are very familiar with this area, some very familiar with this area, but then like when you connect the dots, there's a bunch of joins that just don't, that's not as clear how to do that. But like that helps a lot of the leaders in the data space itself as well. And I would imagine not just kind of like leaders, but like tangential functions where people aren't as familiar, even if they could have the technical skills to actually pull it off, it would just make them massively more,
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like every team has some sort of like tribal knowledge, which unfortunately lives in the mind of one guy. If he's off today, See you today. It's nothing happening today. Ideally, you want your AI systems or any sorts of software layer that you use to actually imbibe this tribal knowledge, especially with AI now. If you can tap into this, it can, like, that's the real bottleneck there. It's not the actual writing of the SQL query. It's actually like, what do you actually want to you describe it? As you correctly kind of pointed out, having this tribal knowledge live in the context of whatever AI systems you're using is really like worth its weight in gold for like AI.
At some point in the future, I feel like there's a I don't know if it's vanity, but there probably would be a metric of how comprehensive is your AI repository. Like imagine like like the way that we kind of measure how data driven a company is kind of is based on how big your data team is or whatever it is. But like the true measure of it is probably how much does your AI know about the data / metrics of the entire company's knowledge and be able to kind of that feels pretty objective.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of do look at this too. The way we kind of thinking about it is like, when you write unit tests as code coverage, a similar thing happens with LiveDocs. If you choose to enable indexing in your LiveDoc settings, what happens is that it goes and sort of indexes your data. What that means is if you upload a product documentation, it does not have to be read in runtime. It'll just go and do it in the background. A percentage value of like how much of your data, how many of your data sources are covered. That means the AI has kind of looked at them, tried to understand what's in them, written down descriptions, helpers, like create embeddings from those descriptions, and then also from that point asked you any questions beforehand. Like, hey, I looked at this table and it's not clear to me like what's in it. Could you give me a quick description? That sort of coverage is a very sort of interesting metric, and it roughly correlates with how good the AI agent is actually doing. So like if you give it a random data warehouse with a bunch of random tables and you upload some like CSV PDFs in there like separately and you ask it a question, it won't do the best job because it has no idea kind of what you asked it to do. But if it's indexed the code base, it's asked you any questions, you clarified everything beforehand, it actually correlates really well. So that's a very interesting sort of number to kind of look at, like what is the coverage that your AI has, like what amount of context have across all of your source systems, and then some more. It's not the end all, but it's a good start.
Hey, Arsalan, as these AI-powered data tools or platforms become the norm of how we work with data in the future, what sort of new skills do you think data teams or non-technical folks kind of will need to adapt to in order to have like very high leverage of these? Like a couple I guess I've heard so far is you mentioned people will need to be able to review what's coming out of these things. Like you said, with like the PRs, like you're going to be able to have to be very good at that. And then kind of what maybe Hyde just mentioned now, people will need to be good at loading as much context, and probably there's some sort of way to like load context in about a company to make it as performant as possible. Are there other skills you think people will need in the future where we're leveraging these kind of AI tools for data?
Yeah, I mean, two that come to mind. The first one is, and by far the most important one, is actually prompting. Prompting is one of those ones where it like seems fairly straightforward, but the more you sort of dive into it, it could be like the delta between a good prompt and a poor prompt, particularly sort of for data work, is massive. So being able to sort of understand what do I feed in the context. For example, in the case of writing, let's say again, a SQL query or doing any sort of data work, intuitively giving it the schema of the database would be a good idea, and like the data types and so on. It's actually counterintuitive. So when you use LiveDocs, for example, or any sort of like, not just LiveDocs, any tool that's writing SQL on your behalf, chances are that the data types, the schema, everything is going to be inferred in runtime. So you actually just like packing the context window with the wrong thing, like, or something that already exists or will be injected automatically for you. It's actually like describing the relations, the references in the table that's actually more valuable. For LiveDocs particularly, we have a prompting guide, which is actually generic. It lives in our documentation that we actually say like it works for anything, even if you're using like ChatGPT to like do any data analysis. Knowing how to prompt it, what's a good prompt versus a bad prompt, in order to get the job done. So prompting is definitely the number one thing. And then the other sort of skill is actually, as you said, sort of understanding how to sort of process kind of what the AI has done and why it has done it, which is that review step. Not necessarily like reviewing a pull request where you're purely looking at code and you're looking for like bugs and like logical errors. In this case, it's actually understanding like the AI has done a certain amount of work that I've asked it to do. Does this really meet my objective? If not, what can I not generally just improve in the prompt, but also in the context that I gave it to actually improve the output. And understanding that different models or like different modalities of even prompting the models are better at specific things. So if you want to write, let's say, explain this chart to me, any image model that just looks at it can tell you it's going up and to the right. But then if you want to write code, having an understanding of like, as if you're completely non-technical, you're not often aware of like what coding a specific model, like using Codex or one of the frontier models, 4.5, Sonnet, whatever, is actually better at writing code. But if I want to like rewrite this email, I'm actually better off picking a faster model or something that's like understanding these like basic like nuances in like how different models specialize in certain things could actually help you get a lot more out of per token. Like your yield would be higher. You know, if you want to write like do complex analysis, you pick a stronger, more coding specific like model. If you want to like explain a report or let's write out a message to stakeholders from some data work that you've done, you're better off going with a model that has like more ways to plug in context, your images, PDF, screenshots, whatever, and it would actually synthesize a nice message for you that gets the point across concisely. Understanding that, learning how to prompt these models, and then also learning how to like always take what the model gives you, at least for the nightly, for the next year, take it with a pinch of salt. Like always, don't just like zero shot it. There's no vibe data analysis, unfortunately. The data doesn't work. You know, you have to really read what it did. Yeah, these would be like sort of things I think would be good skills to have in order to make the most of like AI tools in general.
Cool. That's great.
So get really good at AI, which we also have a lot of content for. So check us out on the other episodes too.
Sweet. Well, I think that brings us to the top of our hour. Before we close out, Arsalan, what's the best way for our audience listeners to kind of keep up to date with what LiveDocs is doing?
Yeah, we're at livedocs.com. LiveDocs is free to sign up, free to use. When you need more power features, you can upgrade. So, but you can get started with LiveDocs today. We're at livedocs.com.
Love it.
Do give us a follow on Twitter. We're at LiveDocsHQ. That's it.
Sweet. Yeah, check out livedocs.com. I was scoping it out this past week. Really cool. Lots of great resources and like pre-made workbooks with the use cases you guys have put together, like was shown today. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Arsalan. Thanks to our listeners and our audience for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like, give us a subscribe, drop any comments if you have a question for us or Arsalan. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.
So much for having me.
Thank you, Arsalan.
Thank you.